Welcome back! Today, me and Phoenix are back at work on the 3-link for my '89 Toyota pickup.
Brought to you in part by Cranbrook Toyota.
And we have got a few more link brackets to weld onto the axle. Where we left off on the last video was getting the upper link mount situated and on the axle, and then actually putting the axle underneath the truck, checking clearances and making sure everything is gonna work, and it is. So now, let's yank that axle back out of the truck and start mocking up some new parts. I did actually get tracking numbers for my hind joints finally, so hopefully by the end of this video, we might be able to cycle our suspension. So it didn't take long for me to find my first problem. So imagine the caster is at 6 degrees. It's not, but imagine it. I want this guy to be flat and straight there. The problem, however, is when you try to put a bolt through it, there is direct interference with the steering stop, which I kind of talked about in an earlier video when I was deciding where I want to put this, whether like shimmying it up or bring it down. And that is actually why I put 2 holes here on the upper link, just in case I want to clock it down for clearance. I've got an inch down to play with. I don't think I want to do that for ground clearance reasons, so there's less low-hanging fruit. I want this to be parallel, like straight with the axle here, which means I'm gonna have to do something either about the bump stop or this guy. Right now, this guy is set up so that the link lengths, top and bottom, will be the exact same length. So if I move this hole out to get bolt clearance, that would then make my upper link longer than the bottom, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. There is an old rule about like you want your upper link to be 75% the length of your lower link, but from what I'm reading, that is kind of like an old school way of thought, especially if you have a low pinion axle. Really, with a shorter upper link, what that means is as your axle is drooping out, the upper link is going to pull it back straight so that your caster doesn't change no matter where you are in your suspension cycle. But if you have a low pinion like this truck has, it means while you're cycling through your suspension, it's gonna be really hard on your U-joints, or your front drive shaft might be just completely limiting your flex and then being hard on drive lines because now it's dealing with an extreme angle as it's drooping out. But if you have equal lengths or even slightly longer upper lengths, it'll actually push the axle, it'll roll the axle so that your pinion is constantly pointing at your transfer case throughout the suspension cycle. Long story short is it's not necessarily a bad thing to have a longer upper link. However, I think I'm going to rework some things and make it so that they're still equal if I move this mount out. And the way I'm going to fix it is with the frame side mount. So if I move this hole backwards the same amount that I am moving this hole forwards, it'll all equal out and I'll be right back where I want to be. And another thought I had is if I make this guy longer, I can actually make it a part of the steering stop, which is good because this is the only good steering stop on this axle. The rest are completely like folded in. If I make this part of it, cut out the steering stop and put a piece of 1/4-inch plate and box it in, I think ultimately I'll have a stronger steering stop and I'll have the link lengths that I'm aiming for. So I'm gonna go back to the computer, redesign these parts, and I'll be right back. Alright, there is the new piece cut here. So if we put that in front of there, looks like we've got all the room in the world for this bolt. Ha! Easy fix. So since I've decided that I'm going to incorporate the steering stop into the lower link here, it's time to take it off. I marked center here and center here, so when I rebuild the steering stop, I can kind of dial it in and figure out where it needs to be. So What do you want out? Now with the lower link mount made and we mock it up into place, it's gonna live right there. However, I just realized that I still need to cut the shock mount off because this fits, but it's gonna be harder to cut it off later with that welded into place. And we are going to build a new mount on top of the axle for the coilover when that time comes. I totally just did a bit where I set my caster at 6 degrees and put this guy at 0 and tacked it in, and then after tacking, I went to turn off the camera and realized the idiot didn't hit record. So anyways, this is at 0 degrees with the caster at 6, and this sucker back here is at the 90. Everything is where I want it to be now. We're ready to move on. Really? And thanks to the Arc Droid, I made the steering stop in like maybe 2 minutes. So this guy goes right here. So there'll be enough room to slide the bolt in and out so that I can remove the heim joints and lower links in the future. Unfortunately, I've got to commit and I gotta completely weld the lower link mount here so that I can put this guy on here. Otherwise, welding in here at a future date will be pretty tricky, if not impossible. I just checked the shipping for my heim joints, and this morning they got to my local area. So in theory, I should have them like probably tomorrow. So that means today, I'm gonna get that other side lower link done. I'm going to tack the link mounts on the frame side. By the time we get those heim joints, we're ready to throw this axle back under. Sam, come look.
Ooh.
You don't know what you're looking at.
No, I don't. But it's shiny and it looks great.
So, what took me a full day yesterday to kind of figure out this lower link and like do all the CAD work and whatever else, and that's a whole lot of thinking. Took me 45 minutes today to replicate on this side. So the axle is now ready for a 3-link and to be thrown under the truck. Starting with the base plate. We've got 2 holes here, 2 slotted holes. These line up with the factory crossmember holes, and they're slotted so that it's adjustable. So right now, this base plate is mounted where I want it to be with the factory crossmember bolts. That being said, it's not ultimately going to be bolted in. Those are just temporary to hold it in place. It's ultimately going to get welded around every side, and there is this frame plate here that is also going to get welded to the base plate and then welded all the way around. And then with the base plate in place, we have the upper link mounts, which tab in right here and right here. Every single one of these pieces has tabs, and there's holes where they need to slot into. With those guys in place, there is these guys, which will then slot in, and then using all this, I will put a plate that goes over top, and it'll box in this entire unit and make it super solid. That being said, now that I've got all this kind of figured out where it needs to be, let's bring out the welder and start making some of this stuff permanent. So I've got everything here tacked in place, and this plate right here is what is ultimately gonna box the whole thing in. But that is a later step, because we've got a couple more things to do. This cross member you guys saw us build in an earlier episode will ultimately go under the transfer cases and bolt into this plate. And the reason these holes are not pre-drilled is because I want to kind of put the cross member in place, jack it up underneath these plates, and then use these holes in the cross member to kind of figure out where the holes need to be in this plate. Now, I could have done some math, figured out where exactly these holes are going to be so that everything like bolts right into place. But ultimately, I'm designing this so that I can replicate this in the future. In my specific setup with the 1UZ, this made me have to push the whole drivetrain back almost 3 inches from the factory location. So where this lands on my truck will not be where it might land on another truck that I want to put this kit on in the future. So this cross member can be moved forward and back in this plate depending on where it needs to land. That's the same reason that the base plate here is slotted. So it's got that little bit of adjustment forward and back depending on the configuration. In my case, I set this up so that the bolts are all the way at the back of the slot. So if this went in a vehicle that didn't have its drivetrain pushed back, you would put it all the way to the front, and then you would mount this 2 inches further forward on these plates. In my case, this is going to be all the way tucked right to the back. We got Heim joints, but there's an issue. There's only 3 of them, which is strange because when I ordered them, I ordered 6 of these Heim joint kits that come with the misalignment spacers and bungs for the tubing. And we got the misalignment spacers and the bungs for the other 3, just not the Heim joint itself. And the misalignments are wrong. These are supposed to be 5/8 and they're 3/4. So we are yet again at a standstill. The 4th Heim you see back here, this is actually for the panhard bar. So this will be axle side. This DOM sleeve and bushings is for the frame side. I still want to see this axle under the truck, so I'm gonna go pick up some PVC and I think just drill some holes in it and put Heims where I can, but obviously I won't get a good idea of how everything works together, but I'll get a good enough for this video. Also, you know what's crazy? Look at the size of these Heims. They look tiny. They are 7/8, and what I used in the Tacoma, I decided to order one size lower for the pickup for a couple of reasons. One, the pickup only has tiny little Toyota axles in it, and it's never getting any bigger than like a 37-inch tire. Whereas the Tacoma has 40s and 1-tons. And before I ordered them, I asked Rough Stuff about them just in case they thought that this wouldn't be strong enough for me, and they figured that these would be just fine. And yes, I realize bigger is probably better, but when you go to order Heims and you realize that these are like twice the price as these, they add up quick. And my whole goal with this pickup build is to do stuff as DIY and as budget as possible so that you guys at home who are following this stuff and want to do this kind of stuff to your rig can, well, learn from my experiences and know where to spend your money and where you don't need to spend your money. And of course, if these are a terrible idea and don't work out, I'll swap them out and make sure I let you guys know. All right, I just got home from Home Depot. I just picked up a full 12-foot length of 1.5-inch ABS black pipe. It is the closest I was able to find to getting like good fitment over the Heim joint like that. Also, I think this is close to a 2-inch outer diameter. So when I drill through it for the ends that won't get a Heim joint because we're missing half of them, it should fit between the ears of the tabs pretty minty. It is time to hang an axle and run some temporary links. And just like that, my 1989 Toyota pickup is now a 3-link solid axle. Check this out. Remove that and drop it. This thing has the potential to have so much flex. It's crazy. Now keep in mind there's no panhard bar or anything to keep the axle actually centered with the frame rail. So if we look over here, I'm pretty sure we'll be alright when it comes to that engine mount because my true up travel limiting factor is right there. The lower link comes in contact with the frame rail. So I might not even need to redo my engine mounts, which I think I'm gonna do anyways just for fun. This is such a cool step. Like, just to think about how this goes from, like, my brain to cardboard, and then I put it into a computer, and then use that fancy tool right there, the Arc Droid, and just make everything I need. And now, as you can see, there's an actual, like, suspension system. That's so freaking cool. Anyways, guys, that's about it for this episode of Dirt Garage. If you do me a huge favor, hit that thumbs up. And hey, consider subscribing because, well, there's a lot more work to do on this thing, and I'd love to have you around. Anyways, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.